All right, the committee will come to order, subcommittee rather. Welcome and thank you to everybody for joining today's hearing, which is entitled Stakeholder Perspectives on USDA's Rural Development Programs. After brief opening remarks from the ranking member and myself, members will receive testimony from our excellent witnesses today, and then the hearing will be open to questions, of course. I'm glad to be joined by Ranking Member Caraveo and the rest of the subcommittee as we talk with these stakeholders about rural development programs. In the late 1990s, I worked in Washington, D.C. Within USDA Rural Development. And so this is a topic near and dear to my heart. Obviously, a lot of very important programs that have an impact on rural America. And like many of you, I represent a rural district. I would know it is a bit of a flex that mine is the entirety of the state. And although it's not a particularly well-populated state, it is a state that has a vibrant rural area, and that rural area provides a tremendous amount of food, fiber, and fuel that helps to power our national economy. And for those communities to continue to do those things, they need the tools, they need additional tools. And I've spoken with local leaders, business owners, farmers, families, and many others in South Dakota. And one thing is clear, although those areas can be robust, of course, they face real challenges. Access to capital, reliable energy, workforce shortages, aging infrastructure, and of course, rural health care is something we hear about all the time. And that's why today's conversation on how the 2023 Farm Bill can improve rural development programs is so important. Programs offered by USDA Rural Development are crucial in helping rural areas develop and attract new economic opportunities. I think the 2018 Farm Bill made a lot of good progress in those areas. It significantly improved programs by establishing new and expanded authorities to help provide access to safe drinking water, dependable electricity, to repair crucial community infrastructure, to support rural employers and employees, and to foster regional economic growth. Our chairman, G.T. Thompson, has called for building a robust rural economy, and I think the changes in the 2018 Farm Bill help to further that vision. Now, before I recognize the distinguished ranking member, a quick note to those of us on the subcommittee. I know everybody loves broadband. I know people love to talk about broadband all the time. And there will come a time when we'll have an opportunity to have a hearing on broadband. I know the chairman very much wants to give us that opportunity. But today, I think we will best use our time if we focus on the other powerful programs within rural development and save the broadband conversation for a more robust full committee hearing to come soon. I look forward to our conversation today and really looking forward to the expert witnesses. This is a great panel. Don't screw it up because I've hyped you up a fair amount. And so help us better understand what we need to do with the 2023 Farm Bill. And with that, I would recognize the distinguished ranking member, the gentlewoman from Colorado, Ms. Caraveo.
Well, thank you so much, Chairman Johnson, for working together to convene today's subcommittee hearing. The first hearing of this Congress focused on USDA rural development and energy programs. And I would like to thank our distinguished witnesses who represent a broad range of rural development stakeholders. We have an impressive panel before us, and I look forward to hearing your perspectives. We spent the beginning of this Congress taking an important look at digital assets, but I am excited that we are now having a hearing on rural development and energy issues. Today's hearing is an important opportunity for members of this subcommittee to evaluate the effectiveness of rural development programs that impact many facets of the lives and livelihoods of our rural neighbors. As USDA's Rural Development Agency is the only federal agency with the sole focus of serving rural communities like the ones I represent, it is critical that we are providing these communities with the tools and resources they need to enjoy the same quality of life and services that are enjoyed by families living elsewhere. The Farm Bill is an opportunity to address these issues that rural communities face every day and help ensure our rural neighbors have access to affordable, high-quality health care, particularly important to me as a pediatrician, economic development opportunities, and solid infrastructure that delivers clean drinking water. As a pediatrician, I've seen firsthand how families struggle when they don't have access to resources and supports that they need. Now, as a member of Congress, I'm advocating for those hardworking families, including on solutions to support mental health in rural communities and ensuring that rural families have more reliable access to childcare. Just this week, I joined a group of my House and Senate colleagues in introducing a bipartisan bill that prioritizes childcare in existing rural development programs. Additionally, as the representative for the richest agriculture county east of the Rocky Mountains and the largest agriculture producing county in Colorado, I know the importance of investing in the bioeconomy, which relies on our farmers and ranchers. The energy title of the Farm Bill does just that, but available funding for these programs has decreased in recent farm bills. From electric and water programs to economic development, technical assistance, and energy programs, today's diverse set of panelists brings valuable knowledge and insight on how rural development programs work on the ground and how they can be improved to better serve our rural communities. This everyday experience and insight will be foundational to delivering a farm bill that meets the needs of our rural communities and the farmers, ranchers, and producers who feed our families. Again, to our panelists, thank you for accepting our invitation to speak before us today. I look forward to hearing your testimony and having the benefit of your insights to better the important programs that many of our communities rely on. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I would now ask the subcommittee to lend their attention to the legend of Howard, Pennsylvania, the chairman of the full committee, Mr. Thompson.
Well, Chairman, thank you. It's good to be a standout among 600 people. Most of them my relatives, so they would probably debate the standout part. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ranking Member, for this incredibly important subcommittee hearing, rural development. And good morning, everybody. And thank you again to our witnesses for sharing your time and your expertise with us today. Since the early 1930s, the federal government has provided much-needed technical and financial support to rural families and farm households. According to the 2020 U.S. Census, the rural population, unfortunately, has declined between 2010 and 2020, which marked the first decade-long rural population loss in history. Using science, technology, and innovation as guiding points, the House Agriculture Committee has a great opportunity to build upon the previous efforts and authorizations to posture a robust rural economy through the 2023 Farm Bill. To best equip rural America for success, it is critical we have thoughtful and well-developed rural development and energy titles. These programs are well-positioned to make a difference for the citizens each of us represents, whether it be providing reliable, affordable, and accessible baseload power, supporting economic development through loans and grants, or assisting ag producers with their own operations. As I often say, rural America is essential America. And without our rural producers, America would wake up in the cold, dark, and hungry. Now, I appreciate the panelists joining us today, and I look forward to today's conversation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Very good. Thank you, sir. The chair would request that other members submit their opening statements to the record so the witnesses may begin their testimony and that we have a time for questions. So, to introduce our first witness today, I am pleased, and actually a couple of witnesses, I believe, I'm pleased to yield to the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Rouser.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'm not worried about them getting it right. I'm worried about us getting it right. Yeah, so, but I had the great privilege to introduce a couple of members of our distinguished panel this afternoon. First, I'm going to introduce Ms. Deborah Nesbitt to the committee, who is chair of the National Rural Lenders Association and vice president for energy and infrastructure at Live Oak Bank, which is in Wilmington, North Carolina, a little place I have to know something about. Ms. Nesbitt has over 30 years of experience in rural economic development, and through her work with Live Oak Bank, has been providing capital to small businesses and farm families across rural America as part of one of the country's largest USDA program lenders and the largest lender for SBA loans in the nation as well. Currently, in North Carolina's 7th Congressional District, Live Oak Bank is financing the Brunswick Battery Portfolio Project, utilizing the USDA Rural Energy for America program, or REAP as we know it. And this project comprises 12 solar sites in Columbus, Brunswick, Bladen counties, and doing a lot of other great work as well. The other gentleman I want to introduce today is Josh Winslow, who's the CEO and General Manager of Brunswick Electric Membership Corporation, a member-owned electric cooperative in Supply, North Carolina, serving Brunswick County, Bladen, Columbus, and Robson counties. Since joining the company in 2004, he's been involved in engineering, system planning, and operations management at Brunswick EMC. And I'll let him talk more about their work in his testimony, but great to have both of these stellar witnesses with us today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Rouser. Sitting between the North Carolinians and batting second in today's lineup, let's see, is Ms. Jessica Baumann, the Executive Director of the Plant-Based Products Council. Then in the fourth chair, we have Mr. Matthew Holmes, Chief Executive Officer of the National Rural Water Association. Our fifth witness is Ms. Olga Morales-Pate, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the Rural Community Assistance Partnership. And then sixth and final witness is Mr. Cornelius Blanding, who's a board member of the National Cooperative Business Association, or CLUSA International. Thank you to all of our impressive witnesses today. We're now going to proceed to your testimony. As you all know, you're going to get 5 minutes. The timer in front of you will count down to 0. When the red light comes on, you'll be hit with an electric shock as a reminder that we need to keep things rolling today. So, Ms. Nesbitt, you are first. Model good behavior. You are up with your 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Thompson, Chairman Johnson, Ranking Member Carrervo, and members of the committee. I appreciate you allowing me to testify today. I am chair of the National Rural Lenders Association, and I grew up on a dairy farm outside of Asheville, North Carolina. I've worked with rural development programs in various capacities for over 30 years. Over the life of my career, I've seen firsthand the benefits of rural development's programs to rural communities across the country. The National Rural Lenders Association was established in 2014 and now has over 80 members who utilize the Community Facilities Program, the Biorefinery Assistance Program, the Rural Energy for America Program, the Water and Waste Disposal Program, and the Business and Industry Guaranteed Loan Program. All provide much-needed funds for rural businesses, infrastructure projects, essential community services, such as fire departments and medical facilities, and for renewable energy systems such as solar and anaerobic digesters. The programs mentioned bridge the gap in financing for rural communities when a conventional loan may not be a fit. With a USDA guaranteed loan, a community or business owner understands that they will be a partner in the loan with the lender and with rural development for the long term, with no surprises on rates or renewals of the loan. Most importantly, in difficult economic times, which we believe is the current lending environment, many conventional lenders are not able or are unwilling to provide financing to rural businesses. Guaranteed loans ensure rural communities have access to capital. The USDA guaranteed lending programs directly result in job creation, business efficiencies, reduced energy consumption, clean energy creation, and investments contributing to the long-term capital and rural vitality. All of this is done with a small investment from the federal government. For example, in FY 2023, the Business and Industry Guaranteed Loan Program provides $47 in lending for every one federal appropriated dollar. Today, the $1.8 billion loan authority costs less than $39 million. For REAP and for community facilities and for the water and wastewater program, there is no cost to the federal government. There are many examples of projects that illustrate the effectiveness of guaranteed lending. In eastern North Carolina, in Congressman Rouser's district, Live Oak Bank made some of the first REAP solar and battery storage loans in the country to the local electric membership corporation. These projects provide low-cost solar energy to the co-op members and compound the value by delivering the energy exactly when it is needed. Another notable project is the acquisition of a community hospital in Maricopa, Arizona. U.S. Eagle Credit Union and Madison One provided 2 B&I loans totaling $13 million. This provided a new micro-hospital with a 24-hour emergency department, a digital imaging suite, and inpatient hospital beds. Shifting to the Farm Bill, NRLA has several priorities to improve the guaranteed loan programs and increase benefits to rural communities. Guaranteed loan lender fees should be capped at 3%. NRLA believes that fees over 3% adversely impact program utilization and that higher fees are too expensive for quality borrowers. Under REAP, we support increasing the loan size limit from $25 million to $50 million to support newer technologies such as farm-derived renewable natural gas, geothermal, standalone battery storage, renewable hydrogen, and refurbished hydroelectric dams. We also support a 90% guarantee for REAP loans under $1 million. Separately, financing for standalone battery storage is only eligible when it's paired with a renewable energy system, and we believe this is a technical oversight and request a correction or enhancement be made to allow financing of standalone battery storage in REAP. We also recommend that the small business size standard for guaranteed loans be limited to the entity filing the application and that business be limited to 1,000 employees. NRLA is dedicated to the long-term prosperity of rural America. Many of our member organizations reside in, are close to, or have historical ties to rural communities. As we continue to offer credit to business and organizations in low-populated areas, it is our goal to educate communities and work with entities to advance public and private services while also helping to diversify and maximize income for businesses and our citizens in rural areas. We will continue to work with Congress and the USDA to provide opportunities to improve public services and grow the economic base of communities while creating jobs and opportunities in rural communities throughout the United States. Thank you very much.
Well done, Mrs. Nesbitt. Ms. Baumann, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman Johnson, Ranking Member Caraveo, members of the subcommittee, and Chairman Thompson. Thank you for the opportunity to share the Plant-Based Products Council's perspective on USDA's rural development programs. PBPC's members use agricultural feedstocks like corn, soy, and hemp to make many of the products that we use every day, from plastics to personal care products to building materials. Bio-based products bring at least $470 billion in value to the U.S. economy and support 4.6 million American jobs that range from manufacturing to STEM. But the overall U.S. bioeconomy accounts for less than 2.5% of American economic activity, and we're falling behind other global markets. Now is the time to seize on a crucial opportunity to develop our rural economies, strengthen domestic supply chains, and address numerous environmental challenges. PBPC is also a founding member of the Ag Bioeconomy Coalition, which includes 12 leading agriculture organizations who all support the advancement of federal policy initiatives that foster growth of our nation's ag bioeconomy. Paramount to these priorities is the modernization of the Farm Bill's energy title and recommended improvements to key USDA rural development programs, including BioPreferred and the Biorefinery Assistance Program. USDA's BioPreferred program aims to spur economic development, create new jobs, and provide new markets for farm commodities by developing and expanding markets for bio-based products through mandatory federal procurement and a voluntary labeling initiative. But the program has not reached its full potential, in part due to inadequate tracking, reporting, and compliance with federal procurement requirements, and flat funding that has long remained at $3 million, failing to account for inflation and the program's growing needs. Through modernization and robust funding, the program can maximize its ability to spotlight the broad array of bio-based products for government procurement and for use by businesses and consumers. So some recommended improvements include establishing minimum requirements for bio-based only procurement contracts, improving compliance, reporting, and data collection across the federal government, regular updates to product categories and bio-based content requirements, and updating funding levels to help ensure that the U.S. will remain competitive globally. The upcoming Farm Bill should also ensure that bioeconomy-related North American Industry Classification System codes, or NAICS codes, are developed for inclusion in the 2027 NAICS updates. Such codes are key to the future success of the bioeconomy because they allow for accurate tracking and analysis of the industry's economic impact and help inform where investment and policy support is needed. In addition, federal leadership is needed to harmonize basic bio-based product terminology. Some relevant terms are already defined in the Farm Bill's energy title, but taking additional steps to harmonize relevant terminology definitions within the federal government and among states, including preemptively when necessary, would create clarity for consumers and a consistent marketplace. Now moving on to the Biorefinery Assistance Program. So one of the most significant challenges to growing the U.S. bioeconomy is the lack of pilot and demonstration scale infrastructure that's essential to de-risking investment in newer innovations that are aiming for full-scale commercial production. Today, U.S. innovators are often forced to go overseas to access the infrastructure that's needed to bridge that proverbial valley of death. Many mid-scale biorefineries are based at public universities because of the expertise, the research, and the workforce development opportunities that they provide. And unfortunately, universities can't access commercial loans that would provide the capital that's needed to develop pilot and demonstration scale facilities. Importantly, Congress can help by providing funding support for additional mid-scale infrastructure to help de-risk and accelerate the commercialization of new and emerging bioproducts here in the U.S. USDA's Biorefinery Assistance Program presents an opportunity to deliver the resources that are needed to alleviate this bottleneck. The program currently provides loan guarantees up to $250 million for the development, construction, and retrofitting of commercial-scale biorefinery facilities that use eligible technology to convert renewable biomass into advanced biofuels, renewable chemicals, and bio-based products. But specifically, we recommend expanding the program to include cost-sharing grants for pilot and demonstration scale plants that are necessary to scale commercial breakthroughs. Thank you again for the opportunity to share our perspective. We look forward to continuing to work with the committee to make sure the Farm Bill provides the support that's needed to bolster the U.S. bioeconomy.
Thank you, Ms. Baumann. Mr. Winslow, your 5 minutes begins now.
Good morning, Chairman Johnson, Ranking Member Caraveo, members of the committee, Chairman Thompson, thank you for the opportunity to testify today. On behalf of Brunswick Electric's nearly 100,000 member consumers, we sincerely appreciate the committee's interest in energy and in rural development issues. Brunswick Electric's a distribution electric cooperative in its 84th year of operation, providing affordable, reliable electricity to southeastern North Carolina homes, farms, and businesses. As a cooperative, we're member-owned and controlled, returning any profits back to our member owners. Around the country, nearly 900 electric cooperatives deliver power to 1 in 8 Americans, including 92% of America's persistent poverty counties. As the committee considers the upcoming Farm Bill, I'd like to highlight 3 critical issues to electric cooperatives that I respectfully request that you consider as you write a new Farm Bill. First, our U.S. programs are critical to reliable, affordable electric service for rural communities. Second, policymakers should approach energy policies with a focus on maintaining electric grid reliability and meeting future demand. Lastly, the toolbox of USDA rural development programs helps electric cooperatives provide benefits to our rural communities beyond electrification. Electric cooperatives are committed to keeping the lights on across rural America at a cost that families can afford. As a distribution cooperative, Brunswick Electric ensures delivery of electricity and manages the distribution and transmission infrastructure needed to safely do so. The consumer members living on our lines expect the lights to come on when they flip the switch, regardless of hurricanes, power supply challenges, or other external factors. In December, when North Carolina faced unusually low temperatures and increased demand during the holidays, electric cooperatives were either subject to rolling outages or forced to ask our consumer members to conserve energy around peak times to avoid them. To avoid similar situations, we must keep reliability at top of mind because a failure to do so could have serious humanitarian and financial consequences. To ensure we can meet demand, Brunswick Electric takes an all-of-the-above approach to power supply. We rely on a mix of always available resources like nuclear and natural gas, along with intermittent renewable energy resources. And meeting future demand will require more base load more dispatchable generation, along with renewable resources. Other factors that jeopardize reliability include new EPA power plant regulations and current supply chain issues leading to lengthy lead times for critical infrastructure like transformers. As the committee knows, rural electric cooperatives were built by and belong to the communities that we serve. We pride ourselves on being much more than just poles and wires companies. We have a long history of partnering with the USDA to improve the quality of life for rural communities. Through the Rural Economic Development Loan and Grant Program, or Red Leg as we refer to it, Brunswick Electric has identified needs in the community, and we work with USDA to help address them. This includes securing loans for weatherization projects, local emergency vehicles, and more. At Brunswick Electric, we continuously look for and implement ways to leverage new technologies for member benefit. As an example, we offer our members the option to participate in a smart thermostat program to decrease energy use during peak times when electricity is the most expensive. To be eligible, members must have broadband. Expansion of broadband to rural areas is imperative for rural Americans to benefit from new technology and innovative energy programs. In closing, Brunswick Electric is dedicated to delivering affordable, reliable electric service to the households, businesses, farms, and communities in North Carolina. Nearly 900 electric cooperatives across the country have similar community-focused missions for the areas that they serve. As the committee works on the next Farm Bill, we look forward to continuing to work with you on our shared goal of improving life in rural America. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Winslow. Mr. Holmes, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Chairman Johnson, Ranking Member Caravejo, and members of this committee. Mr. Chairman, it's an honor to testify before you today on rural development's water and wastewater programs. NRWA has grown from the grassroots to become a federation of 50 state associations with over 31,000 members. NRWA was established in 1976 by rural Americans in rural Oklahoma to address two critical needs: to get away from unsafe water sources by building new water systems with funding from the Farmers Home Administration, and to help rural communities comply with the then brand new Safe Drinking Water Act. Since inception, we have been trusted by rural communities. NRWA and our state associations are governed by volunteers that manage and operate rural systems. Our field staff works with operators and system managers, solves real problems, and does not leave until the job is done. This pool of expertise provides access to resources that would otherwise be unaffordable for small communities. Through billions of dollars of financial assistance from rural development over 80 years, the standard of living in rural America has improved greatly. Unfortunately, these advancements are often taken for granted. The health and economic benefits made possible through this committee are immeasurable, and on behalf of every rural utility we represent, thank you. I will now outline our members' top priorities for your consideration in drafting the Farm Bill. The most successful approach for overcoming water challenges in rural America is the Circuit Rider program created by this committee in 1980. Circuit Riders are full-time water experts that provide on-site, peer-to-peer assistance. The simple fact is, even with new technology, rural America needs hands-on help. Last year, Circuit Riders helped protect the health and safety of nearly 25 million people, 41% of rural America. In the long run, this assistance saves money and protects the government's investments by fostering efficient and sustainable practices. We respectfully ask this committee to reauthorize this program. State rural water associations have been helping water utilities with on-site disaster response and recovery for decades. However, there are statutory and administrative barriers that limit the effectiveness of help to impacted areas. We request this committee consider expanding existing authorities to include preparedness, response, and recovery. These recommendations come directly from our field staff with extensive experience in disaster recovery. Protecting small and rural water systems from cyber attack has been a top priority also for us. Unfortunately, given the scope and complexity of cyber threats, the reality is most rural utilities lack the resources and in-house expertise to defend themselves. We suggest this committee consider providing funding for cybersecurity specialists to help rural systems protect their utility and the public health of their residents. NRWA recommends modernizing the rural development water and wastewater programs to better address current needs with additional affordable financing and servicing options. This should include 0% and 1% loans to disadvantaged or economically distressed communities. EPA and the Rural Housing Service already have similar authorities. We also suggest advancing voluntary consolidation of rural utilities by allowing a contiguous system to apply for a grant loan on behalf of a neighboring underserved community. We believe this authority should be narrow and ensure that the additional subsidy is targeted entirely to the community in need. Replacing our aging workforce is one of our top concerns. Data shows that up to 50% of operators will retire in the next 10 years. Our nation needs a pipeline of skilled workers to help ensure clean and safe water for the public. For these reasons, we established a national registered apprenticeship program recognized by the Department of Labor and have successfully created hundreds of quality jobs in rural America. As proud as we are of this program, it is only a drop in the bucket of the workforce needs that we face. We suggest including financial resources and policy in the Farm Bill to provide utility, mentorship, and training. In conclusion, rural development's water and environmental programs are critical to keeping user rates in small-town America affordable. With a $4.26 billion backlog, the demand for this program is high. Technical assistance protects the federal government's investment and helps communities provide safe, sustainable, and affordable water and wastewater services. NRWA is proud to stand as a partner with USDA Rural Development and this committee. Please consider our entire organization at your disposal as a resource as you draft the 2023 Farm Bill. I would also like to say it's been a pleasure to work with the committee staff. As you all know, they're extremely professional and knowledgeable, and thank you for the opportunity to participate today.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Morales-Pate, you're up.
Thank you. Good morning. Buenos dias. It's an opportunity that very much appreciate. Thank you for the opportunity to be here and to speak to you, Chairman Johnson, Ranking Member Caraveo, and members of the subcommittee. It's important for us to discuss how rural communities are impacted by the work that this committee does and the agency, the Department of Agriculture. RCAP is a national nonprofit organization that has been working and providing technical assistance in all 50 states for over 50 years. We have over 350 technical assistance providers that work across the country, the territories, tribal lands, and colonias. Our approach to the work we do is grounded in long-term trusted relationship with communities to help them develop and advance them through the phase of infrastructure. So we work with communities from the pre-development phase all the way to the construction and beyond to make sure that the federal dollars invested are utilized as they're intended to. We work directly in partnership with rural development. Part of the work that we do in the field is work with the field staff to make sure that projects are advanced, that they address rather what they're intended to address. So it is an honor and an opportunity. Last year, we served 3.5 million rural and tribal communities, residents, in more than 1,600 communities across the country. The average population was 1,500, and the median household income was less than 75%. We served over 300,000 individuals in indigenous communities. In addition, we served more than 1 million people of color. All of this work wouldn't be possible without some of the very critical programs that we have been receiving funding for technical assistance from USDA over the years. With that, we stand in support of the reauthorization of the Water and Wastewater Disposal Technical Assistance and Training Grant Program because it makes all of this possible. In addition to the funding that we leverage to USDA, we also are able to leverage funding from other sources to be able to further the work that we do. Through the partnership that we have with USDA, on average, we leverage $400 million in infrastructure and provide about 140 trainings, serving about 1,300 systems. Now, it sounds like a lot, but at the same time, this country has over 85,000 community water systems, small water systems, population under 10,000. So it is a drop in a bucket of need the need is much greater than any of us can provide. So it's very important to work together. And regionalization or consolidation, voluntary consolidation, is one way to further our efforts. The aging infrastructure, the inability to retain operators or workforce, the inability to qualify for funding is becoming a challenge for small communities. So it's important that we keep in mind ways that can help us think and do beyond and be able to maximize economies of scale to be able to make sure that these communities remain healthy and thriving. And so that's one way that we have been doing, and we have research document. We have many cases that document the process. On the solid waste side, that's another program that is very critical, and we have been able to advance a number of communities over the years. It is a small program, but it's still very important to communities where solid waste service is not available to them. A program that I'd also like to mention briefly is very important is the technical assistance, the Community Facilities Technical Assistance Program. And the reason for it is because it takes more than water and wastewater for communities to be sustainable. They have needs in health, in fire, in education, and so many other areas, and that is very, very important. And so we stand in support of the Community Facilities Program. We also stand in support of the Rural Investment Initiative because it takes more than federal dollars to do what we do and to develop the capacity and sustainability of our communities. So it takes many, many partners to make sure that the communities are sustainable and that we're able to see thriving rural America. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Mr. Blanding, you have 5 minutes.
Chairman Johnson, Ranking Member Caraveo, and other members of the subcommittee, and Chairman Thompson, thank you for the opportunity to testify today and highlight the critical role that cooperatives play within rural development through USDA programs. My name is Cornelius Blanding, and I am testifying today in my capacity as an elected board member for the National Cooperative Business Association, CLUSA International, NCBA CLUSA. We are the apex trade association for cooperatives across all sectors that are crucial for our local economies. In my day-to-day, I serve as executive director for the Federation of Southern Cooperatives. Since 1916, NCBA CLUSA has served as the primary voice for cooperatives across all sectors. Our members include not only individual businesses, but also the larger sectoral associations like NRECA and the Federation of Southern Cooperatives, which is the largest black farmer-owned and serving institution in the country. 1 in 3 Americans are members of nearly 65,000 cooperative establishments. With over 130 million members, co-ops and credit unions are found in every corner of our nation. As Congress works to reauthorize the Farm Bill, NCBA CLUSA recommends the following legislative improvements. First, the Farm Bill should increase flexibility within the Rural Co-op Development Grant and other rural development programs by modifying burdensome matching requirements, allowing for larger, regional, and multi-year grants, and incentivizing and facilitating regional collaboration. Second, provide robust investment in expertise and capacity for rural places, especially historically underserved communities, to plan, implement, and measure the impact of locally led strategies. And third, invest in rural infrastructure, including electric, community facilities, water, and housing. Cooperatives are rooted in local economies and more resilient during economic downturns. The democratic governance structure allows the member owners of a cooperative to make business decisions that are people-centric. Programs across rural development like the Rural Co-op Development Grant, the Value-Added Producers Grant, Rural Energy Savings Program, and others support local economies. Rural areas are overrepresented in key economic indicators such as persistent poverty, disadvantaged communities, and low economic growth with an aging workforce. Ultimately, rural places have been left behind by federal policy initiatives meant to spur national development. The next Farm Bill presents an opportunity to change this. The RCDG program provides grants for technical assistance, training, education, and outreach to cooperatives. Since the last Farm Bill, RCDG funds have created 300 new businesses and helped create over and save thousands of rural jobs. The Federation of Southern Cooperatives provides a good example of this. As a 13-year recipient of RCDG funds, the Federation has worked with rural African-American communities to spur economic growth through cooperative economic development and land retention strategies. Through RCDG, the Federation has also built regional capacity by allocating staff that provided technical assistance to farmers on production, quality control, storage, and transportation methods that ultimately increase the marketability of their produce and in turn their profits. As part of the multiplier effect of co-ops, members are also assisted in assessing other rural development programs such as the 504 home repair and multifamily housing rental assistance program. These examples are just for one RCDG recipient, but you have heard similar stories across the board. However, one of the challenges with assessing RD programs is the break in momentum to simply apply for funding. Each year, organizations must slow down or even pause the work on the ground to create a competitive proposal. Moreover, it's difficult to demonstrate notable changes simply because significant economic development doesn't occur in such short time spans. To truly transform the circumstance of rural and socially disadvantaged communities requires years of effort. So again, NCBA CLUSA recommends the following legislative improvements. First, increase flexibility. Second, improve the RD policies so that underserved populations can access and build capacity. And third, infrastructure investments to encourage sustainable long-term rural development. To materialize these recommendations, Congress should invest in expertise and capacity for local-led strategies. NCBA CLUSA aims to serve as a resource for this subcommittee and all members of Congress by helping to lead a broad coalition of rural development stakeholders that support these principles and is ready to work with you. We encourage you to support the programs and improve upon their success in the next Farm Bill. The assistance we provide helps rural businesses develop and grow beyond economic benefits. By addressing barriers to access these programs as well as fully unlocking the potential of rural development programs, we will create a more resilient and prosperous rural America. Thank you for the opportunity to testify before this subcommittee this morning on behalf of NCBA CLUSA. I've submitted my full testimony and stand ready for to answer any questions from this committee. Thank you, and I'll stop here to prevent any further shock.
Very good, Mr. Blanding. Okay, everybody understands the drill. From here on out, members will be recognized for 5 minutes in order of seniority, alternating between the majority and the minority, and then in the order of their arrival if they came after the gavel. So we will start with the committee, with the chairman of the full committee, Mr. Thompson.
Well, Chairman, thank you. Thanks to all of our witnesses for great testimony on a critically important title of the Farm Bill. Mr. Blanding, we continue to see a decrease in the availability of good, high-paying jobs in rural communities as businesses close due to the lack of available personnel. Can you talk about how NCBA CLUSA helps expand workforce opportunities in the communities you serve?
Yes, sir. Thank you for the question, Chairman Thompson. So NCBA, the primary role of NCBA CLUSA is cooperative economic development, and so is many of the members of NCBA. And so developing cooperatives where communities can own and control their futures and infrastructure. But we think it's important for the committee, for Congress, to actually invest in infrastructure in these rural communities, infrastructures that can be controlled and owned by the people themselves in their communities, and investing in local-led strategies.
What initiatives should we consider for the 2023 Farm Bill to bring high-quality, in-demand jobs to rural America?
Chairman, I think there's a lot of things already underway. Congress, USDA has been talking about infrastructure like beef processing facilities and others. So we think it's important to look at the anchor in rural communities, which is always based around agriculture. And in that, you're talking about many small farmers who don't have the capacity or the size to go at it alone. And so really putting those kind of buildings and infrastructure in those communities, but again, more importantly, making sure that there's ability for people to organize cooperatives and control that infrastructure and work cooperatively together.
Well, thank you. Mr. Holmes, as you know, more than 90% of the United States water systems service communities with fewer than 10,000 persons. How do the USDA RD water environmental programs provide communities in rural America access to safe, affordable, and financially sustainable water and wastewater services?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chairman. As you know, Rural Development WEP program is 100% dedicated to communities under 10,000. That's the purpose of the program. They understand rural America, and they're trusted by rural America. Many changes have impacted our sector recently: supply chain, emerging contaminants like PFAS, regulatory burdens like the lead and copper rule. So this agency is critical to act as a partner so rural communities can address these challenges. The EPA is also making a historic amount of funding available through the SRFs, but as you likely know, most of that funding goes to large metropolitan systems. So that makes the WEP program essential for rural America to level the playing field and keep them a competitive lender.
Would the gentleman yield?
Sure.
You asked a very good question. For the small communities that aren't incorporated, that have these water issues, they don't have the resources to, I mean, we have the new $55 billion for clean drinking water, but how can these communities of 1,000, 2,000 people finance the infrastructure? I mean, this is the part that I don't understand.
Good question, Congressman.
Thank you, the gentleman, for yielding.
Mr. Chairman, the technical assistance is essential to that, as well as consultants and engineers that put these projects together. Again, this is why rural development, an agency that understands these communities and has a field staff, that's why the field staff and the core programs are so essential, because they can reach out and work in these communities and help them put these applications together. That's what's really going to move the needle to make all these investments that you all have made available work for rural America.
Yeah, maybe wrong, but that Circuit Rider program has been instrumental in bringing the pieces together for the rural communities. And why do you believe, or what ideas do you have to modernize these programs?
So the WEP program is a lifeline program for these communities, as I mentioned. However, with these changes that people moving in and out of rural America, unprecedented population growth changes, industries moving in and out, that program needs to stay competitive. SRFs have put a historic amount of money available, and consultants are going after that money, right? They see opportunities, and I don't blame them. I would do the same thing. I would go after that. But that does not leave a large pool of engineers and project development resources for rural America. I believe the department needs maximum flexibility in making the tools available in order to make these programs work financially, frankly, for the consultants.
Very good. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The ranking member is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Blanding, in your testimony, you mentioned the care economy and how cooperatives played an essential role not only in providing critical services during the pandemic, but also strong workforce with less turnover and higher wages. Within my practice as a doctor, I've seen the importance of strengthening healthcare services. Rural areas have 20% fewer primary care providers than urban areas, and 65% of rural counties don't have a psychiatrist, which with our mental health crisis is a real problem. This is why a priority of mine will continue to be increasing access to health resources, including mental health, for our rural areas. Over the past 10 years, we've seen over 130 hospital closures across rural communities, and the pandemic further exposed and underscored the healthcare disparity as rural Americans faced a mortality rate roughly 37% higher than urban Americans over the last 3 years, and were more vulnerable to serious infection and death from COVID-19. So can you speak to how cooperatives are filling this health accessibility gap and what we should do in the 2023 Farm Bill to ensure rural Americans have sufficient access to healthcare services?
Thank you for that question. So this is a real example. We work in rural communities, and I'll give one specific example in Alabama. Very, very rural population, where our organization, the Federation of Southern Cooperatives, is the largest employer with 10 employees. And so it talks about what that community looks like. There are no rural hospitals within a 50-mile radius, and everybody has to go to the next city, again, at least 50 miles to get health care. One of the solutions was to provide health services through a cooperative structure in something called the Gainesville Health and Wellness Center. So it gives the people the ability to aggregate, to organize, to own their own health. to get the infrastructure. So again, we're talking about infrastructure here. How do you provide infrastructure where communities can control that infrastructure and they can call in the people they need? So I think the chairman talked about broadband as an important issue in the beginning. And so there's telehealth. There's so many forms that we can connect broadband and the physical infrastructure to provide telehealth and provide access to doctors, to psychologists, to whatever a community needs. But that community should lead those strategies, give them the opportunity to have that infrastructure and to build that out where they can control and bring in the kind of health care that they need, regardless of what it looks like.
You brought up what my follow-up question was, Mr. Blanding, and really I'll open this up to the rest of the panel. Treading carefully on the area of broadband, of course. Does anybody have any thoughts on what else can be done in the Farm Bill to improve rural health access overall, in particular expanding access to telehealth services? And if not, that's okay. Go ahead, Mr. Blanding. It looks like you have an answer.
I'll gladly jump back in here then. So again, not only, I talked about the infrastructure, but again, there's so much critical infrastructure and resources. Flexibility in these programs is the key, I think. Flexibility and making multi-year programs available so that people can look at their challenges and especially healthcare over the long term. How do you build that, and then how do you make sure that communities are able to collaborate with each other? There are a number of rural doctors out there who are willing to travel and move from community to community if they had support and if they know that there are programs that can support that kind of movement around. I think we just have to make sure that we give people the ability through that flexibility, through that increased funding, and through really being intentional about connecting communities, not just broadband, but just, again, infrastructure and folks having the flexibility to build their own solutions.
Thank you very much. Mr. Holmes, you made some really great points around technical assistance. Just wanted to open that up for the rest of the panel. If anybody has any additional ideas about how these rural communities can, how we can improve the process so that they can apply for programs, it's something that I have heard a lot from the people in my community. So just really quick with those last 45 seconds.
Thank you for the opportunity. What I would like to add is, once again, emphasizing the flexibility. I think one of the things that I've been a technical assistance provider for many years. I was one of the people on the ground advancing these projects. And I will say that the shift in the last 10 years, a community that I could bring to USDA 10 years with under 1,000 population, I'd be able to qualify them. I cannot do the same thing for that community today. The challenges that we have, the limited debt capacity, all the requirements, is just a significant number of complexities that keep communities from accessing funding.
Thank you. I yield back.
Rather than recognize myself for 5 minutes, I'll just push myself a little further down the list. We've got Mr. Rouser and Mr. Davis have been here and attentive since the beginning of the hearing, as is Ms. Badinsky, so we'll work some of them in. Mr. Rouser, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And whenever I see panelists who are lined up to talk about rural development programs, my life kind of flashes before my eyes. Back in 2002, working on that Farm Bill, some of these programs we're talking about today are ones that I was heavily involved in crafting. And then later, a few years later, ended up managing some of them as Associate Administrator of the Rural Business Cooperative Service, and also served as Director of Legislative and Public Affairs at the time. Of course, they didn't pay me for both jobs. They only paid me for one. I don't know. Who's the idiot here, huh? So, question for you. I'm going to start with Mr. Winslow. Let's assume, hypothetical, this isn't going to happen, but just for hypothetical, let's assume all the RUS programs are wiped out. What happens? How does that change your business model?
Wow. Appreciate your appreciation for the RUS
I like to
program.
get the extremes here,
Yeah.
so we know where we need to land.
So as you can imagine, electric cooperatives that serve 3 meters a mile, 5 meters a mile, 10 meters a mile, their low density as compared to some of the bigger IOUs in urban areas. The cost of capital is very important to keeping the cost of electric service low. So part of our responsibility for reliability is looking out into the future, making investments today for the demand that we're going to see in the future, and a stable financial outlook is important to not pass costs along to our member owners. So the RUS program provides that stability. It's been in place for a long time. We feel it'll be in place for a long time in the future. And it kind of takes the complexity of looking at competing in the financial markets with other borrowers out of the equation.
Ms. Nesbitt, I'm going to move to you. You had specific recommendations, excuse me, pardon me, in your testimony. Can you kind of give the reasoning for those recommendations? And are there things that need to be harmonized between our programs at rural development?
Thank you. Is this on? Yes, regarding the REAP size standards, we think that a lot more renewable energy projects would be able to be financed if that affiliate rule was dropped. USDA uses the small business size standards as a default. It wasn't specified in the Farm Bill. So some projects have affiliate companies, and that kicks them over the threshold of the number of employees. So we think a lot more renewable energy projects could be funded if that threshold was changed to 1,000 employees and the affiliates were not considered. Also, talking about NEPA, we recommend that, as was enacted in the recent debt ceiling legislation, that NEPA, guaranteed loans are not federal actions. So we believe that NEPA does not have to be complied with for guaranteed loans. Banks, lenders are responsible for the environment. We follow state, federal, and local laws. We don't think this additional layer of environmental review is needed. We also, as far as our Farm Bill priorities, we support increasing the loan limits for REAP from 25 to 50 million. A lot of these projects are expensive now, these renewable energy projects, so allowing that larger loan limit would be helpful to do larger projects with the cost of materials and whatnot. We could do newer technologies that way. We also support standalone battery storage as eligible for REAP. There's battery storage and other types of energy storage are very important now, so we think REAP should be allowed to have those types of projects as eligible entities.
Thank you. Mr. Holmes, I'm going to move to you real quick. Obviously, PFAS is a big issue in my neck of the woods and around the country. But a more fundamental question, what's the average age of water and sewer in these rural areas?
Good question, Congressman Rouser. In our apprenticeship program, which is supposed to take young people and be a pipeline of workers into the industry, it's 47. I think if you look at the utilities themselves, you know, it's upper 50, mid-50s or upper 50s. We're training 90-year-old operators out there still.
So obviously, a lot of upgrades need to be made. There's only so much money to go around. You know, real quickly, are there things that can be done in addition to dollars that would be helpful on that front?
I think, yes, training into high schools, you know, getting and establishing that pipeline in high schools is critical to get young people involved and to create a career path and make this a profession, an honorable profession that's recognized in America.
My time's expired.
Mr. Davis, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair and to the ranking member. And Chairman Thompson, while you're here, and to the witnesses, I do want to let you know that Chairman Johnson's shocker also applies for members too, okay? Glad to have you here, and especially our North Carolina witnesses today. I'm just going to move briefly down the line, if I may. I'm starting with Ms. Nesbitt. Ms. Nesbitt, I've had so many requests prior to coming to Washington, since I've been in Washington, for community project funds, fire departments. What would you say, especially these rural fire departments that are doing just amazing service in these communities? What's the greatest challenge you've seen to lending access to capital?
Well, access to reasonable funding is definitely a challenge for rural fire communities. These programs are essential. The direct loan programs, as well as the guaranteed loan programs, provide that capital. USDA is a partner with lenders and with the communities to provide long-term financing with fixed rates or adjustable rates, longer terms that they could get with conventional loans. It's very important to have these programs available.
Thank you. Mr. Winslow, glad to see you here as well today. You mentioned earlier in your testimony about the rolling blackouts that we saw in North Carolina back in December. Based on your experiences, what would you say is the greatest takeaway?
The greatest takeaway, Congressman, appreciate the question, is that we had an unanticipated failure of our power system in North Carolina. And we haven't seen anything like that in a very long time. So I would say that we do need to focus on reliability and capacity for the future. It needs to be a top priority.
Thank you so much. I want to shift gears. Mr. Holmes, so recently we've done some work around the Cybersecurity for Rural Water Systems Act of 2023. And I just would love to hear from you, how would this bill help rural communities and water systems, in your opinion?
Thank you, Congressman, for your leadership in this area. It's critically important. Our systems are just not prepared for cyber attacks. Small rural, and I would argue many sectors are not, but small rural systems have so much on their plate. There are volunteer boards of directors. Sometimes there's one operator or two staff people. They don't have that expertise to prepare against cyber attack. So your bill, what that will do is expand the circuit rider program to create a cadre of experienced cybersecurity specialists that can go on site and help these systems assess the threat and provide a plan to fix it.
Thank you so much. And then my last question I would like to direct is to Mr. Blanding. Mr. Blanding, you've mentioned quite a bit about technical assistance. Based on your experience, I'm just curious, what would you say if you could group or categorize the type of technical assistance that's most needed based on your experiences to help those in particular in disadvantaged communities?
Thank you for the question, Congressman Davis. So again, for me, this work is much bigger. Your job as Congress is to protect our air, our water, and our soil in this country. And we all citizens have to work together to do that. But so many times, people in rural communities don't have that training, that capacity, those resources to build the expertise to do them things for themselves. This problem won't be solved by anybody swooping in doing anything. It'll be about people in communities left with the ability, with the expertise to do things for themselves. So it's about capacity building around training the trainers, making sure that a community can identify the things that they need and then get the training to do the things that they need. So capacity building, it ranges, that technical assistance ranges, but it centers around capacity building so the expertise needed in every community is left in that community.
Okay. Thank you so much to all the witnesses for your answers today. We moved along, and Mr. Chair, I yield back to avoid the shock.
The chair will be recognized for 5 minutes. Thereafter, Ms. Budzinski will have 5 minutes, and then she'll be followed by a gentleman who looks as striking and gallant as his portrait on the wall, Mr. Lucas. So I'll start with Mr. Winslow. I observe, sir, that D.C. is a town that too often is excited about things that are sexy, even if they are not important. Reliability is decidedly something that is important, even if it is not sexy. And certainly as a former state utility regulator, I observed that people did not focus enough on reliability. You, in response to Mr. Davis's question, you noted how important it is, but I'd go just a little bit deeper. I mean, within the rural utility service, are we focusing enough, whether by culture or procedures or by rules, on making sure that dollars flow toward projects that do indeed improve the reliability of our grid?
So I appreciate the question, Congressman. I'll say a short answer to the latter part, no, I don't think we're focused enough on reliability. And to the extent that an electric co-op is accountable to its members, so Brunswick Electric is accountable to our member owners for reliable service, There are threats to that. It's not, we're not able to just sit and silently observe the conversation on resource adequacy. We need to be part of it. And I think that's pretty acceptable to our country. Everyone can agree that reliability is important. So to that extent, the technologies of the future will not be the technologies of the past, but we're all on a path to keep reliability in this country. And I think that we should support those that are in the long game to provide that, including electric cooperatives, those that are tasked and accountable to the member owners to provide it.
And for so many of us who live in rural America, we understand, particularly in northern states, we understand, although I guess southern states get hit by ice storms too. I mean, you can have major weather events that can bring down a lot of distribution lines, and that is disruptive. And, God love the linemen who go out and work in really inhospitable conditions. But I think if you move further up the delivery system and you start to get to some transmission lines, if you don't invest in those kind of reliability assets, you can have much, much larger disruptions. Am I wrong about that? I mean, give us a little more color commentary on how big these problems can be if we underinvest.
Sure. So speaking about replacement, and let's talk about replacement of our resources to those that will be the technologies of the future. It's important that when you replace things with the same characteristics. Otherwise, it's a substitution. So if we have characteristics with some of our conventional generation sources that are reliable, we need to look at replacing them with reliable resources. And that does include transmission as the grid becomes less centralized and spread out over the systems. A reliable transmission backbone is also critical to reliability.
So, Mr. Holmes, shifting to you, you mentioned in your testimony the importance of having programs that support and value regionalization and consolidation. One of your recommendations was allowing strong systems to apply for dollars to serve areas outside of their system that are maybe not particularly well served with infrastructure. I want to how do we think that supports the idea of regionalization and consolidation? I'm concerned that if not deployed right, it could actually do the reverse, which is rather than have systems voluntarily come together, it would create tools that would stand in the way of that cooperation. Am I wrong?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chairman. And no, you're not wrong. I think the devil's in the details with this, which in the written testimony, we've laid out some of those. The keys to our recommendation, this is voluntary, on the behalf of the underserved community. Really, the problem that it's trying to address is a board of directors that's running a well-run utility and is looking to take on substandard infrastructure. That's sort of against their fiduciary responsibility. That's going to add a burden to their existing ratepayers. So our proposal is to provide a financial incentive for that better-run utility to essentially get a grant loan combination only to benefit the new customers that are being brought in. It's a financial incentive.
I see. So this would be as part of a transition into a cooperation, consolidation, regionalization plan. That makes a ton more sense. Thank you very much. With that, I would yield back, and Ms. Budzinski, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the ranking member. And it's great to have all of you panelists with us here today. Since I joined Congress, I have really made rural development one of my top priorities. I know with a lot of my colleagues serving on this subcommittee. And I'm looking forward to exploring a range of topics with you today. First, I'd love to start with RESP. If I could direct this question to Mr. Winslow. The Rural Energy Savings Program, RESP, provides zero interest loans for energy efficiency upgrades to rural houses. The benefits of this program are numerous, from providing welcome upgrades to our rural infrastructure, reducing energy usage, to lowering energy bills for our residents, which I know is a very important issue for the constituents I represent. Just last week, alongside Assistant Leader Clyburn and Senators Murkowski and Welch, we introduced the Rural Energy Savings Act, which would increase the grant components of this program and authorize RESP for the next Farm Bill. I speak with the Illinois co-ops in my state regularly about the importance of these additional resources for rural communities. And so, Mr. Winslow, can you briefly explain how funding is administered through this program and why a grant component may be necessary, a necessary addition, as this bill that was just introduced last week proposes?
Sure, thank you, Congresswoman. So co-op staffs across the country are fairly small, and there's really no economic return or incentive for cooperatives to take on some of these programs for the cooperative itself. We see the connections, we facilitate the connections, and then we see the benefit to the communities. Therefore, RESP, as well as any of the other programs, have an administrative burden. And a lot of times they're applications and reapplications, and it takes a lot of time. So I would say 100% support for a grant portion to help those administrative burdens and kind of offer some more resources to the co-op to get the funding.
Okay, thank you. My next question is for Ms. Baumann. Turning now to the bioeconomy. My district produces the most amount of biofuels in the state of Illinois. In your view, what needs to be done to ensure rural communities benefit from the growth and investment in our domestic bioeconomy? Are there gaps in U.S. biomanufacturing that can be addressed over these next 5 years?
Yes, thank you for your question. And there's a significant challenge that the bioeconomy is facing in the lack of pilot and demonstration scale facilities. There's an amazing pilot facility in your district at the University of Illinois, but their schedule is full, and there's increasing demand for that facility and other facilities like that, and it's just not available here in the U.S. And then the further challenge is once a startup has gone through the sort of pilot phase, they want to move up to the next scale of demonstration phase, and there's a real significant lack of that infrastructure, which is forcing companies to go to Europe or elsewhere where they've invested in their infrastructure, so those facilities are available. So we're now putting at risk that American innovation not coming back to the U.S. or that company not being able to sort of hang on to go to Europe, and that company doesn't go anywhere. So there's a real need for more facilities like IBRL and around the country, along with the next sort of phase up in demonstration scale.
Thank you very much. And I have one additional question, and this last question is for Ms. Morales-Pate. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that I'm currently working with Senator Gillibrand on reintroducing the Rebuild Rural America Act, which would fundamentally transform how we assist rural communities and prioritize revitalization. One of the biggest changes we've been making is an effort to really beef up technical assistance, which we've been talking about today, and capacity building. Your testimony covered the need for more robust national multi-state technical assistance, and I think you've touched on this a little further. Can you tell us more about why this is so important again and why it's needed?
The multi-year technical assistance is very important because the majority of the work that we do in assisting communities developing projects are multi-years. And so it's very important that we stay with the communities for the duration of these projects. You have to keep in mind the average community that we work with is population under 1,000. More often than not, we work with volunteer members. And so that consistency, it's very important, the consistency through the duration of the project.
Thank you so much. I yield back. Thanks.
After Mr. Lucas, Ms. Glusenkamp-Perez will be recognized. Sir, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Over the years, the inefficiency in federal permitting process have slowed down and in some cases completely halted infrastructure investments and improvements across the country. These lengthy environmental reviews increase the overall cost of many projects and cause significant project delays. Congress responded to those concerns by including language aimed at streamlining the NEPA permitting process in the recently passed Fiscal Responsibility Act. So I turn to you, Mr. Wilson. Can you speak to how these reforms will benefit electric cooperatives across the country?
Sure, the reforms that modernize or streamline this permitting process as it changes hands through different departments. cuts down on delays, and of course, cutting down on delays and the resources needed to push projects through that process are also costly. So as a cost-saving measure, we would definitely support reforms to that process.
But you have found the present system prior to our attempts at reforms, which have not been fully implemented yet, but you found those things to make your process much more complicated, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Mrs. Nesbitt, how will these reforms impact your industry? And I'd also welcome any thoughts from the rest of the panel may have about how USDA should implement the recently passed provisions.
Thank you for the question. We do think that it will improve the process of getting these loans and the capital out to rural communities. It's a very lengthy environmental review process, sometimes can take over a year, and you've got a small business owner or a local government, a tribe waiting for this money, and it's being held up due to the environmental review. And as I mentioned earlier, our banks do comply with local, state, and federal environmental rules, and this NEPA process is just an extra layer.
And again, to the rest of the panel, I would address the goal is not to do away with NEPA, but to try and speed the process up to provide some additional certainty. Would anyone else care to touch on that, how it's impacting your part of this equation?
Congressman, I think it's essential for the water sector, the supply chain issues, the cost of pipe and chemicals and projects, that it's just changing so rapidly that if the process is delayed, those costs aren't even, the project has to be rebid. So some of these projects are not being developed because of those delays.
Mr. Congressman, I'd like to add to that right now we probably have 90% or higher projects that have a shortfall, or significant shortfall, and a lot of it has to do with the permitting process and all of those things. So that's impacting the ability for communities to be able to benefit from those projects. In addition to that, the cost of projects are escalating, which means that sometimes we have to come back and restart the process or find a bridge loan or some other kind of supplemental funding to be able to complete a project. And so it's having a tremendous impact, especially in small communities where we have already met the debt capacity.
I guess continuing with you, Mr. Holmes, the Circuit Rider program has been beneficial to many rural communities since its creation in the 1980s. In your testimony, you talk about expanding the authority under this program to better respond to modern problems. Could you provide us with some examples of why these additional authorities are needed?
Yes, sir. Thank you for the question. We briefly discussed cyber threats earlier, and just small rural systems in Oklahoma are simply not prepared for this. The current circuit rider workforce is an excellent boots-on-the-ground workforce, but they do not have that expertise. We've partnered with organizations that are doing education and awareness training for both our members and the circuit riders, but you really need some dedicated individuals who both understand water utilities and cyber threats, because water utilities are all unique. They're all built, unlike, unfortunately, some of the other industries here. If you've seen one water utility, you've seen one water utility, and there's 50,000 of them. The emergency response provisions that are in there for the circuit rider program, and my written testimony too, is something our circuit riders are good at and work on now, but there are burdens and barriers to provide the kind of ongoing support to truly respond and recover for disasters.
And once again, just for a moment, reinforce for the benefit of all of us here. Most water districts are, as you said, voluntary boards, very limited staff. These circuit riders are expertise people who go around to a variety of water districts on a rotating basis to provide information, correct?
Yes, sir.
With that, I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
After the gentlewoman from Washington, it will be Mr. Nunn from Iowa. Ms. Gluesenkamp-Perez, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I got some really good advice meeting with community members. They said do something about water and sewer costs. It's something that touches every family in my district. These are fees that are sometimes reaching $170 a month. Which is really profound in working families. And so when I was reviewing requests for congressional funding projects, I really put a focus on municipal water programs. And over what we're seeing and hearing from people operating these is that they are often past the recommended lifespan. They're undersized. They're on the brink of collapse. And really, this failing infrastructure is endangering the health. I mean, listen, like, hepatitis is real, and it's something that we could be dealing with. So these municipalities are forced to implement Band-Aid solutions or take out huge loans they cannot service, and communities are facing real health risks as a consequence. One complicating factor is that I am in Southwest Washington, so that's all along the Columbia River and the ocean, the Pacific Ocean. So the water table is very, very high. There's a lot of artesian wells, and deeply complicates. There's not a one-size-fixes-all approach here. So, Mr. Holmes, from your perspective, are the available rural development water programs sufficiently flexible to account for these kinds of regional differences?
Thank you for the question, Congresswoman. You just made our case, I think, more eloquently than I could. They do the best with what they have, and it's been an excellent, long-standing program. But again, we are dealing with so many new challenges in the water sector. It's changed out there in rural America, and these folks are struggling with the small resources they have to adapt to these changes. That's an excellent example that you brought up with the shallow water table. That engineers are dealing with unique situations all across the country, and it's costly to do these things. That's why our modernization of RD programs, RD tools, recommendations we have in our testimony, we believe is critical, because those affordable financing options and additional servicing options will help address the exact issue you raise of affordability.
Thank you. I'd also like to talk a little bit about the workforce challenges you all are facing. I was excited to hear about how the apprenticeship model you developed for water and wastewater systems operators, these types of programs are essential to building strong economies, resilient economies, especially in our rural communities. In addition to the financial resources you mentioned, what kind of long-term investments can we make to help you and others who are developing these programs be successful in small and rural communities?
Thank you for that question. Raising the level of workforce, I mentioned it earlier. We're trying to provide a career pathway, but we're also trying to make safe water professionals and clean water professionals a recognizable career for America. It's not there. They're not being paid close to what they should be paid. They are the most important, one could argue, public health official in these rural communities, because what they do touches the public health of every single resident every single day. So I think even just raising that recognition and advancing that conversation is critical. We are trying to do that through the apprenticeship program. This is a long view. We're looking at this as a 20-year model to take where we are now. And there's many, many things I think that the committee could help in order to advance this over the coming years.
Well, I want to sincerely thank all of you for the work that you're doing, keeping the wheels on the bus, keeping many of our rural communities intact and thriving. So thank you, sincerely. I'd also like to take a quick minute to talk about how rural development programs can better support childcare in rural communities. It is almost impossible in many rural communities. My husband and I drive almost 4 hours a day to get our child to daycare. And before coming to Congress, we actually brought our child to the auto shop with us, which is a whole nother can of worms. But I recently introduced a bill expanding childcare in rural America, which directs the USDA Rural Development to prioritize projects under 6 RD programs that address the availability, the quality, and the cost of childcare. So I would love to talk to any colleagues who might be interested in pursuing some of these solutions with me. Mr. Chair, I yield back. Thank you so much.
I had just announced earlier that Mr. Nunn could go next. So Mr. Nunn, you're up, and Mr. Langworthy, my apologies for getting Mr. Nunn's hopes up before your arrival. Mr. Nunn, you're recognized for 5 minutes, and Ms. Crockett, you'll be out thereafter.
Anytime I can share the clock with a man from the Empire State's a privilege. So thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, compliments, we're dealing everything from commodities markets, digital assets, to rural development. There's a lot to get through here in 5 minutes, so we're going to jump right into this. Mr. Holmes, appreciate everything you've highlighted. You've seen one water system. There's 50,000 out there that you have not seen. Challenge that we have, with a background in cybersecurity, hackers accessed the California water treatment plant's computer system recently and deleted critical information. Just 1 week later, a second water treatment plant in Florida was hacked. In this case, the hacker accessed the plant's software program and drastically increased the amount of sodium hydroxide from 100 parts per million to over 11,000 parts per million. Now, this type of attack not only is very dangerous, it can be deadly. And in our rural communities, the Circuit Rider program is set up to help address a number of the concerns. Talk to me specifically, what can happen to a rural water plant and how it can decimate particularly a rural community if a cyber attack occurs?
Thank you, Mr. Congressman, and thank you for your leadership on the cyber issue. The rural communities are vulnerable. We mentioned earlier they're simply not prepared to address cyber threats. We believe that this should be a shared responsibility. Consulting engineers and folks that are building these systems, frankly, are installing SCADA and remote system controls that are not cyber prepared. However, all of that responsibility falls on one person often in these utilities. Fortunately, in the case in Florida, that one person noticed finally that those controls had been changed. But if they had not, that would have been a dramatic threat that would have impacted public health.
I think you absolutely nail it on the head, and this is why Representative Don Davis, my colleague from North Carolina, a Democrat, myself as a Republican on this side of the aisle, have said this is a bipartisan issue. It's something we need to tackle. And the hope here is that with this type of legislation, that one person isn't on the hook for trying to identify everything. They can reach back into a system that can be provided so that you have the expertise at the time of the emergency to truly go after and address these. I appreciate your leadership in helping craft that legislation. Hopefully that's something we can see move forward. Mr. Wilson, I want to talk a little bit on the electric grid here. You know, we talk a lot about uncertainty in this committee, largely since that is the nature of agriculture. One cause for concern here is the reliability of our electric grid. In your testimony, you explained how the rural utility service programs are providing reliable and affordable electric services, particularly to my folks on Rural Route 1. Moving forward, how can we best prepare for future demands of a robust electric grid?
Great question, Congressman. The RUS program is fundamental to infrastructure investment for cooperatives in rural America. Aside from that, any tools in the toolbox that give us accessibility and flexibility to funds that can diversify our power supply mix into the future and meet our demand are important as well. At Brunswick Electric, we rely on firm, dispatchable resources, those being nuclear and natural gas. But the technologies of tomorrow might not necessarily be the ones of today, and we're looking to be diverse and minimize our risk in terms of financial risk or reliability risk into the future.
Very good. You know, one of the things in my state of Iowa that's so important is rural infrastructure. It's that farm-to-market road, it's the bridge, it's the investment that my concrete guy's making, it's the investment that my farmer's making on building a new facility. With that, I'm also from a little place called Des Moines, which has one of the largest financial institutions in the world. Doesn't matter whether you're a community bank or a local credit union. One of the obstacles they've shared with me time and time again is the time it takes for a loan to be approved. Now, Ms. Nesbitt, one of the things I'd like to ask you is farmers have experienced inconsistent loan approvals from state to state. Does the National Rural Lenders Association share these concerns? And if so, what impact is it having on borrowers right now for building those core things that we need?
Thank you for the question. We do share those concerns. Just throughout the federal government, USDA Rural Development has attrition programs, retirement, experienced people who are no longer with the agency. So there are many states and local offices who do a wonderful job processing applications. If some of those best practices could be replicated in other states, and working on operational efficiencies while taking on new programs is also a concern. But we stand ready to help in any way we can to suggest solutions for that.
I appreciate that. I also want to thank you in particular here. Some of the program and flexibility that you've incorporated into the biorefinery assistance program, hugely helpful for my soy and corn growers back in the great state of Iowa. Thank you, Mr. Chair. With that, I yield my time.
After we hear from the, we'll hear from the gentlewoman from Texas, and thereafter we'll hear from the previously slighted Mr. Langworthy. So, Ms. Crockett, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to all the witnesses for your time today. I'm glad we're finally coming around to rural development. And most people don't realize, because I currently serve Dallas, that I actually lived in East Texas. So I know a little bit of something about rural America, specifically rural Texas. I was living outside of Texarkana, where I would wake up and I could smell the paper mill. Not something you want to smell when you're waking up, let me tell you. Nevertheless, there are so many issues in here that really are a matter of life or death for our rural communities. I'm particularly concerned about food deserts, broadband access, and economic development in rural communities, and look forward to working with my colleagues to address these issues just to make sure we're all on the same page. 9 out of 10 food deserts are in rural counties. But what does that mean? If you live in a food desert, you have to travel unreasonably far to access fresh, healthy foods, and so many people just don't and can't. The result is that people living in food deserts are 30% more likely to suffer from obesity, more likely to suffer from chronic illnesses, and are 14% more likely to wind up in a hospital. So I think we can all agree that we have to do something to get rid of the food deserts. We have to act because large stores aren't opening in these communities because they can't maintain their profit margins, and small stores don't have the money needed to build and open a new place. So in my mind, there are 2 ways we can address this in the Farm Bill. Either we should allow grocery stores to apply for federal loans to build these critical community facilities, or we should increase the delivery options people in these places have to get healthy foods brought to them. So, Mr. Blanding, if we were to consider expanding the community facilities loans, would that allow grocery store co-ops to start bringing food into food deserts?
Thank you for that question, Congresswoman. And I'm originally from Alabama, in Montgomery, Alabama, right down the road from Prattville, where there was also a paper mill. And I woke up to that smell also, but unlike you, we enjoyed it. We knew there was something going on when we smelled that. I think one of the biggest options in terms of these food deserts is cooperatives, giving people the ability to access resources to build their own grocery stores. Because what we know is that food deserts are not just food deserts, they're also health deserts, they're also educational deserts, they're income deserts. They're just deserts overall. And making sure that we connect all those issues together and again, giving people the ability to build the solutions to those problems. Again, that's when we talk about investing in infrastructure. The congressman talked about these reliability assets, and from a standpoint, but when we look at reliability assets, we got to look at people as a part of that also, and really building the capacity of people getting the kind of education and training, back to that TA that the original question was about, people building their capacity to address their own issues. And we think cooperatives are the #1 way to do that, where people can aggregate, where they have limited resources, limited talent, or limited whatever, to build that power to do that. So investing in infrastructure, but investing in people, investing in the ability for people to develop cooperatives to address every issue in their community, including the food desert issue.
I appreciate that, and I appreciate you connecting the dots, because you're absolutely right. It's not just going to be limited to the food. It affects the health, which is why I brought up the health outcomes as well as the economic opportunities and so forth. So another issue that we have, though, is broadband access in rural America. And so this limits farmers' access to precision agriculture technology that would improve crop yield and protect our environment. It limits the ability of researchers at our land grant facility universities to do their jobs, and that isn't even the half of it. So, Mrs. Morales-Pate, could you expound on the need for additional investment in rural broadband?
RCAP doesn't really move in the rural brand space. We don't have as much work there. But I can say, and we were told that we were not going to have a lot of conversation around this topic, but I will say that it certainly makes a big difference for our communities to be able to access broadband, to be able to connect, to be able to have jobs. One of the things that we see in our communities, in rural communities, is that they are dormitory communities, they're dorm communities. It means that people are commuting to the larger urban centers to work. Broadband gives them the ability to stay in their communities and work from them, minimizing impact to infrastructure and things like that. It also allows the opportunity to grow more jobs in rural spaces, which is one of the things that we need to do more of. We're seeing the migration across the country since COVID, and we'd like to be able to keep advantage of that.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. I'll yield.
Mr. Longworth will be recognized for 5 minutes and will be followed by the gentleman from the 1st District of Illinois.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member. I think every member of this committee has seen firsthand how tight the current labor market is, particularly in rural communities, with too many vacancies and too few applicants. Meanwhile, many individuals have taken out thousands of dollars in student loans for 4-year degrees. But too often, the degrees don't have the return on investment that was expected. I appreciate the focus today on the potential to expand workforce development under Title VI, and I believe it's vital that we change the paradigm on what it means to develop our nation's workforce, particularly in our rural communities. And with that, Mr. Blanding, as it relates to rural economic workforce development, I want to talk about the Rural Cooperative Development Grant Program, the RCDG. Since its inclusion in the previous Farm Bill from 2018 to 2022, this program has created over 3,000 jobs and has saved almost 5,000 jobs and has created 300 new businesses. How can we as policymakers improve upon programs like the Rural Cooperative Development Grant Program and continue to support workforce development and preserve our rural businesses?
Thank you for that question, Congressman. And I think that's the crux of the matter. And again, we talk about really looking at rural communities where you can bring the community together to really identify the gaps in that community, but more importantly, the asset. In these rural communities, they're really the lifeline of our nation. One asset for this country is forestry, as one example. And a lot of trees are in these rural communities. And if you just look at that, there's a lot of opportunities for people to have workforce development around that, around looking at the forestry industry, agriculture, but every part of that community really understanding the assets in it, building the labor force around that, educating our folks so they understand the community as an asset as opposed to a liability. So I think investments in those communities where we look at the community, what's in it now, and build the infrastructure around that. And so I'll give you a real example. Right now, too, in Alabama, we're working with youth to really learn how to operate machinery to harvest trees in their community, to continue to be a part of that agroforestry industry that is already there, but they're just not participating in it. In Texas, right on the coast, fishermen coming together to really build their own docks to control their catch and build income around that. There are so many opportunities if people are able to be a part of the infrastructure, to be able to aggregate as cooperatives as one example. Because again, when you look in these rural communities, you're looking at small landowners, you're looking at limited resource folks, and cooperatives give them the greatest tool to aggregate, but to build businesses around what's already there, create income, and look at the job growth market from that standpoint.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Holmes, we're constantly hearing about shortage of qualified workers in several industry sectors, particularly in rural America. In your testimony, you mentioned that according to employment data, 50% of individuals in the water industry will leave the workforce in the next 10 years. This gives all of us some cause for concern as these systems remain vitally essential for rural communities. While I know NRWA's apprenticeship program has proven to be successful and has provided some relief in educating and upskilling individuals for water and waste job opportunities, I know there's been some concern about its ability to be flexible and meet the needs of certain rural communities. Can you describe these drawbacks for this program, and what can Congress do to ensure that it meets the workforce challenges in rural America?
Thank you for the question, Congressman. As you know, the vast majority of the country's small community water systems are small, have very limited staff, sometimes only employing one full-time or even part-time paid operator. These limited economies of scale and technical expertise are compounded by the workforce issues. The scarcity of operators wanting to work in these areas increases the difficulty of them to comply with the Safe Drinking Water Act and serve safe and clean water. Unfortunately, our apprenticeship model is hindered by this because there's no capacity at these systems to provide on-the-job training or mentoring for these folks. They really can't even take on somebody to, on a part-time or full-time basis to transfer their knowledge for the next generation. It's kind of unique to these communities because, unlike other folks here, our folks are so small and are doing so much with so little. It also prevents their access to the workforce system, the workforce funds. So what I think Congress could do is provide additional resources for training and mentorship outside of the apprenticeship program for these communities.
Thank you very much, and my time is little, so I'll yield back.
Thank you. We will have Jackson followed by Rose. Sir, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. I'm a big advocate of your work, Mr. Blanding. Thank you for your service. I'd like to thank all the members and all the persons that have come out today to give your testimony and share your experiences. Mr. Blanding, two things I would like to bring to your attention. In your testimony, you highlighted the need to invest in historically underserved communities. Let me be more specific. As it relates to the African American farmers, they've been excluded, denied, locked out, left behind. What can we do as members of Congress to help ameliorate this bridge, make things better going forward? We can't relitigate everything in the past, but what are the impediments that we can focus on now that after we have many good intentions, we will still have some hurdles and blockage that we need to overcome?
Congressman Jackson, thanks for that question. There's a historical issue when it comes to underserved communities, and particularly black communities. That was shown in the Pickford class action lawsuit where USDA was shown to have been discriminated against black farmers for years. But there's repercussions that have happened to that for years. And many of those things are still happening. And even when they're not happening, the perceived issue around that is real. So these communities have been underinvested in for decades, for centuries. So I think there's going to have to be real investment in all of our underserved communities, and particularly in black communities, where it comes to the lack of access to credit and the impacts of even when there was bad credit decisions made in terms of how lenders have approached those communities. So really looking at debt relief issues, looking at targeted investments in these communities, whether it's infrastructure, whether it's capacity building. But again, understanding that community has dealt with a number of issues historically, and many of them have been proven, and making targeted investments in that and making sure there's a part. But more importantly, looking at this as a bigger issue. Again, we think about this from the standpoint of our nation. Our nation is only as strong as its weakest citizens, and really making sure that we make the kind of investments in every part of our country, and particularly those countries that are the weakest, that have been disadvantaged for years, to make sure that there's equity and getting them on par so that they can be a part of the solution, whether it's health care, whether it's climate change, whether it's energy independence, whatever the issue is in our nation. Every community, every part of the population has to be a part of the solution. And the only way they are is if we invest in every part of it. And some parts of it, including the black community, need the investment to get on par, need extra investment.
Thank you so much. The second thing is regarding the outlook of automation. Automation is coming through many of these belts at a furious pace now, and we're going to look at a huge displacement of workers in the next 6 to 7 years by 2030. Any thoughts, recommendations you would have for us?
Yes, and thanks again for that question, Congressman. And so this issue is making sure that many of our communities, especially rural communities and underserved communities, are not left behind as automation or any technology comes forward. And we have to, again, always look at the profile of many of our folks. And I use black farmers as one example because I know that best. You're talking about majority, 80% of them in the South. You're talking about 90% of them who are farming on less than 100 acres. And so in the access technology or any automation, you have to have scale. And again, that brings the opportunity to look at cooperatives. So again, I want to stress the importance of the ability of cooperatives to be a part of the solution in our country as it comes to any issue, and especially automation. And so how do we make sure we move co-op development in every part of the rural development, the Farm Bill titles, and especially rural development, but also make sure it permeates beyond that. So making sure that we really look at the profile of our communities and the potential of them being left behind, and what are some of the solutions. Again, we think one of the major ones is the ability to organize cooperatives.
And for the record, I'd like people to know that these are current cases that are being settled on discrimination in Mississippi from last year for 2022. Can you elaborate on that, please, of the most recent cases of discrimination with African-American farmers?
Well, Congressman, it's an ongoing issue, and it's an issue that's currently being addressed as part of that was being addressed by the American Rescue Plan and now the Inflation Reduction Act. Right now, issues are dealing around Section 22006 and Section 22007 of the Inflation Reduction Act, where we're looking at discrimination in all of our communities, wherever it exists, to make sure that people are being, that these issues are being addressed. So they're being addressed all over our nation as part of the current legislation.
I look forward to working with you. I yield back my time. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, sir.
To our witnesses, you've been at it for like an hour and 45 minutes. You're doing great. So I know it feels like the baton death march of sitting here and being pummeled with questions, but so far nobody's embarrassed themselves or their association, so congratulations. We will go to Mr. Rose and thereafter the gentlewoman from Oregon.
Thank you, Chairman Johnson and Ranking Member Caraveo for holding the committee, and thank you as well to our witnesses for being here. Mr. Winslow, in your written testimony, you talk about the fact that Brunswick Electric Membership Corporation is working to, quote, integrate more renewable power sources, unquote. In your opinion, is there any way for electric co-ops to drastically increase their use of renewable power resources without ultimately relying on increased use of nuclear power?
Thanks for the question, Congressman. So I think there's an important distinction between resources that are energy-based and those that provide capacity and baseload generation. And there's no good or bad to any of the sources. They all have their place in the power supply portfolio. When it comes to the replacement of baseload generation, an important part of replacement is that the characteristics of the new technology match those of the old technology in terms of reliability. So in that test, some of the renewable sources are intermittent. They're good energy resources, so they can replace some fuel, but they did not provide the capacity or the baseload that some of the more firm and dispatchable resources provide.
In your electric co-op today, what percentage of the power that you distribute comes from nuclear sources?
It's about over 50%, 55%.
Interesting. And have you explored the new nuclear, the small modular reactors using Generation 3 technology? Is that something that you all are looking at or your suppliers?
So further up the chain in our fully integrated part of the country, there's a lot of discussion about advanced nuclear and small modular reactors in the industry. And in my personal opinion, from being involved in a lot of those conversations, is that we'll see those technologies emerge within the next 10 years.
In fact, do you think it's possible to achieve the carbon goals that some have without depending on nuclear energy, greater reliance on nuclear energy?
Well, I will reflect, what we as a trade organization believe is that an approach that involves all resources is necessary. And that varies greatly across the country and is pretty much a function of geography. So in our part of the country, we're very heavy nuclear. Other parts of the country, they don't have the ability to rely on nuclear like we do.
Thank you. Mr. Holmes, the 2018 Farm Bill expanded the eligibility for guaranteed loans through the water and waste program to communities of less than 50,000. Have you seen an uptick in newly eligible communities taking advantage of the program?
Thank you for the question, Congressman. And Mr. Chairman, I'll endeavor not to screw this up. This program is underutilized historically. As you know, I think last year, FY22, only 8 loans were made under the water programs under the $50 million loan authority. One alteration that was attempted almost 2 decades ago was to amend the tax code to allow USDA to guarantee tax-exempt financing. That's prohibited by current law. Certainly that change would score. However, this is the only modification that we're aware of that will significantly increase the water and waste disposal guarantee program, especially for larger communities.
Okay. Any other ideas about how we could ensure communities take advantage of the program and maintain viable waste and water systems?
For the guaranteed, no. And we have been having extensive discussions, including with committee staff, in order to do that. It's just, we will continue to do so.
And in the remaining seconds we have left, Mr. Holmes, Mr. Nesbitt, in one of my communities back in Tennessee, I saw the unfortunate situation where USDA Rural Development financed 2 water treatment facilities in the same community. And as that advanced, there was a fair amount of political discussion around it, as you can imagine. But I'm just wondering, do we need to revise the criteria that is applied? Clearly, commercial lenders would not finance 2 competing facilities that would more than supply a community, and yet in this case that happened. And we're out of time, so I don't want to ask the committee for their indulgence, but you might respond to that if there are changes that need to be made. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Very good. Ms. Salinas, and thereafter the gentleman from Ohio who informs me he's kind of a big deal will be recognized. So, ma'am, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, and I thank the chair and the ranking member for today's hearing. And I know some of my colleagues have already gone over the technical assistance issue, but I just want to revisit this. As we all know, the Farm Bill provides critical resources for economic development, climate resilience, and infrastructure projects in our rural and underserved communities. However, the requirements for accessing funds, raising matching funds, and navigating the complex web of programs pose significant barriers to our smaller communities. And many rural communities have limited staff, expertise, and networks to apply for and actually receive grants or to even know about the potential federal opportunities in the first place. And then when they do, compliance on the back end is then an issue. Small farm towns in Oregon often don't have grant writers, city managers, or attorneys on retainer, and they remind me consistently of that fact during our listening sessions. So in my view, this upcoming Farm Bill should make badly needed investments in capacity building and technical assistance programs that would help rural communities do 2 things. 1, identify, and then 2, leverage those rural development grants and other federal opportunities, including the loans we were just talking about. So my first question for Mr. Blanding is, can you talk a bit about the capacity challenges that rural communities face, as well as potential solutions like the Rural Partners Network?
Yes, thank you for that question, Congresswoman. We think the rural network is a model, but needs to be built upon. Again, at the core of this, how do we make sure the community is a critical part of it? I think the community is best equipped to identify the challenges, the needs in their own community, but more importantly, to build upon the current assets that are already there. So really giving people an opportunity to be a part of these conversations where they can help drive change. So when other folks go, the capacity is left behind. Many times, this isn't an issue about just capacity, it's a numbers game. And so in these communities, in these organizations, you have limited resources, limited people, limited staff. In our case, the Federation of Southern Cooperatives, as one member of NCBA, our organization has been doing this for 56 years. But it's a staff of 65 folks working in 7 states. And so usually the people who have to do the proposals are the people who are out doing the work. And every year, when you have requirements where people have to come in and do another application, they're spending 3 months doing the proposal and gathering information as opposed to the work. And so this is about really making sure that they're able to partner with people like with the Rural Network and others to do this. And I think one important thing to do is to really look at the expertise, the capacity, experience of folks. In our case, as an example, if you know we've been doing the work for 50 years, why the constant applications? So you can get in and see the results. This goes back to, again, making sure that folks have the capacity to not only implement the programs, but to also measure the impact so that Congress has the information to see what's working, what's not working. But again, it all has to be locally led. And so no matter what solutions that are put forth, they have to have a local component, and people who are part of that community have to be a part of addressing the issue and a part of those solutions, and the ability for them to aggregate and to collaborate across regions.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. And now, Ms. Morales-Pate, can you weigh in on the similar issues as well, and further discuss your organization's idea to create a rural investment initiative?
Thank you for the question. Representative Salinas. We have been working in rural communities for 50 years, and we continue to run into the same challenges when it comes to developing infrastructure projects. For example, the funding that you get through USDA, you actually don't see the money until you close, at the time of closing. So between the pre-development and that design piece, there is a lot of pre-development funding that is necessary to advance those projects, and it can take up to 2 years. The size of communities that we work in do not have the cash flow or the ability to be able to move through that process. So what is being proposed through the Rural Investment Initiative is to be able to help communities to be able to have that, because it takes additional resources to look for that funding or projects get stalled. As I said before, I have been a technical assistance provider for many years, and unfortunately, I've seen projects that have had to be deobligated because we're not able to get them to the closing. And so it's very important to think beyond the existing program, what else can be done to supplement and to make sure that the federal dollars are making it to small communities.
Thank you. My time has expired. I yield back. Thank you.
After the gentleman from Ohio, Ms. Caraveo and I will be prepared to close. Sir, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Johnson and Ranking Member Caraveo, for holding this important hearing as we work to strengthen and foster the economic viability of our rural communities. The U.S. Department of Agriculture Rural Development Mission supports rural economic security in Ohio and throughout the nation by partnering to improve essential community facilities such as critical infrastructure, including water and waste treatment systems. Its operations also boost rural economic development by funding technical assistance for agriculture and small business operations, and by helping to address pressing supply chain issues in Northeast Ohio and across the country. USDA's rural development bioenergy programs also provide a valuable opportunity to support America's farmers and the larger agricultural sector to increase domestic energy security and create new markets for America's farmers. Such key initiatives including providing renewable energy development assistance and the production of biofuels, which benefits American farmers and our fuel supply. As roughly 40% of my state's corn crop is used in ethanol, creating new market opportunities for biofuels is absolutely key. Toward this end, I look forward to exploring more fully the potential of opportunities of a sustainable aviation fuels or farm-to-fly program within USDA's bioenergy programs to foster alternative biofuels and national aviation, expand the fuel supply, and support U.S. agriculture. To any of our witnesses, can you please share how USDA's biofuel programs, including the biorefinery, renewable chemical, and bio-based product manufacturing assistance program, the Biomass Crop Assistance Program, and the Bioenergy Program for Advanced Biofuels can serve to increase domestic energy security, support the agricultural sector, and foster the farm economy in the United States? To anyone who would like to answer. Thank you.
Sure, thank you for the question. I'll jump in a little bit, although I can't speak to the fuels as much, but certainly to opportunities to provide new markets for farmers more generally, which is an opportunity that we see the BioPreferred program providing along with the Biorefinery Assistance Program. The BioPreferred program, it's intended to increase market demand for bio-based products that are made from corn, soy, hemp, all those different agricultural feedstocks. And there's some opportunities to really help grow that program through the next Farm Bill to help increase that market demand and create those new markets for farmers. And then we see opportunities with the biorefinery program with adding in, as I talked about earlier, a grant program that would help then increase access to mid-size biorefinery facilities to help increase the production of bioproducts, get those products to scale, to commercial scale, so help increase, again, some demand for those products from farmers to help increase bioproducts.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Rural economies and consumers have become acutely aware of supply chain issues over the last several years and challenges in creating a more resilient and secure United States food supply chain. Just last week, I heard from a small cattle processing operator near my congressional district, E.R. Bolliant's packing company, on their barriers to increasing processing capacity. For this reason, I am working with my colleague from Ohio, who also sits on this committee, Congresswoman Brown, to introduce legislation to reauthorize critical funds through USDA's Food Supply Chain Guaranteed Load Program to support investments in infrastructure for processing, manufacturing, transportation, and distribution toward a stronger and more secure U.S. food supply chain. This program is already on the ground and working, including through a recent effort to increase access to processing equipment to provide food services to schools, daycare facilities, and seniors throughout northeastern Ohio, among other initiatives across the country. Once again, to any of the witnesses, can you please share how USDA Rural Development's Food Supply Chain Guaranteed Load Program can assist middle of the food supply chain activities such as processing, storage, transportation, distribution of food to increase capacity and more effectively to get food from our farmers to American consumers?
I'll take a quick stab at that, Congressman. Thanks for that question. I think that question is very similar to your original question about biomass and other energy type questions. There are major things that are going on now. USDA, there's a climate smart ag initiative going on to look at just those things you mentioned with biomass and other things, and we're exploring those opportunities now. And with this food supply issue, there's things in reference to putting beef production facilities in certain areas. But again, the issue is around the flexibility of the program and making sure that the community can own and control it. Because the challenge historically has been bringing in corporations or companies to put those things there, and they don't usually last if the community's not engaged. So again, there's a number of things that are happening now, from climate smart ag to production facilities. But the question is making sure that they're flexible enough that folks can access them in the communities and the communities can lead them. And again, I bring back this point about cooperatives, giving people the ability to aggregate where they can own those as companies, as cooperative businesses.
Thank you. I just want to thank the witnesses and for your patience. Thank you, Chairman and Ranking Member. I yield back.
But wait, there's more. Mr. Molinaro, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
It's the best for last, or not really, just last? Fair enough, Clary. That's the second time in 3 weeks that the chairman has insulted me in public, but it's quite all right. I accept it.
I'm glad you're not keeping track of that in private.
I'm not. Well, that's true. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to continue on that very theme. I know that it's been covered a few times. The lack of flexibility and either redundancy or complexities of navigating the different funding streams. Now, I think you've all already talked about this, and of course was just mentioned, rural development funding is often a big challenge for small communities. I know this firsthand as a village mayor 25 years ago. Navigating USDA and rural development dollars was always a big challenge for small communities like ours. I saw it as a county executive, 20 towns, 8 villages, and 2 cities, all trying to navigate through the funding streams. The applications are burdensome. The soft costs are too often too great to even allow smaller communities to access those grant dollars, and then the lack of flexibility. So, Mr. Blanding, I think I'll carry on where you left off. You touch on some of this. You talked a little bit about it just a moment ago, about the highly targeted nature and the lack of flexibility within many of the loan programs that the USDA administers. It's a challenge. Cities, urban centers get the benefit, in particular, of community development block grant funding. I understand the value of having targeted grant programs because rural communities look differently all across the country. But what specific ideas have you either discussed or would you offer to consolidate and streamline access to those programs to address this issue of flexibility and to really drive down the overwhelming nature of accessing USDA dollars?
Thank you, Congressman, for that question. And first of all, I'd like to say thank you, because there's significant things that this Congress, that USDA and the Secretary has done recently to really start moving toward that. FPAC is one example. They've really started to consolidate things. I'm not sure if we know the results of that yet, but there's intentions, that's my point. So I think really looking at this issue from a rural perspective and understanding every piece and how they connect together, whether it's childcare, whether it's housing, whether it's energy, agriculture, all of those things, and really trying to solve the problem, making sure that we talk about all those in one system. We were talking about water and water waste systems and things of that nature, meant as an example. But the issues happen sometime away from that. I remember clearly in 2016, I think it was in Toledo, Ohio, when it was the largest catastrophe, if you will, where there was I don't know what you call it, the issue where some pesticides ran off a farm and created this toxic algae bloom. And it's happening in every state in our union. And so we have to deal with this issue even before it gets to the water treatment plants. And we deal with that issue by dealing with our rural communities, dealing with producers, small to large, and making sure that we connect all these programs and that we understand what's going on. I think that'll prevent.
Do you think, despite the specific nature of the grants, do you think a consolidated application or a single point of access for rural communities would be of value?
I do think so.
And specifically, I know that the USDA launched the Rural Partners Network, and of course it's in its infancy. Has NBCA interacted with, what have you done to interact with the Rural Partner Network, and what recommendations might you have to expand and build on what is supposed to be that collaborative approach?
Yeah, nothing yet, but I think it's great intent there. We're looking for the opportunity to do so. But again, I think consolidating this is great. But again, we can't. But every agency within USDA is different. But we can't take power from different agencies because they operate differently. We just got to figure out a way where we can all talk together. But again, Congressman, I want to be very careful to answer that question because consolidation can mean a number of things. And so it's without taking power from different agencies because they all bring different value. But how do they all talk together and figure out how to solve the problems collectively or cohesively?
Yeah, I think coordinated application and then individual review is the way to make the process a little bit easier. My last 25 seconds, and I won't ask for an answer. I just want to address that the USDA addressing within rural energy programming the consumption of active farmland for solar field development should be a priority for us in the development of the Farm Bill. We want to accelerate and support renewable energy. We want to diversify America's energy production, but we have seen valuable soils and active farmland being consumed really out of desperation instead of design. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Molinaro. And Madam Ranking Member, if you have closing comments, we are eager to hear them.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, growing up, my parents always taught me the importance of building a strong community and family, of hard work, of caring for others. I think these are values that are absolutely foundational to our rural community, certainly in Colorado and across the country. I think, as we've heard many times today, these communities know best how and where to invest resources, and it's incumbent on us to ensure that they have what they need to support hardworking rural families. Again, thank you so much to your witnesses. Really appreciate your testimony. Look forward to continuing to work with you as we face the Farm Bill reauthorization. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Caraveo. I've lived in a couple of different big cities over my life, and I don't have anything against the big city, of course, but my wife and I choose to live in rural America. We choose to raise our 3 sons there. It's just a remarkable, rural America is just a remarkable place. And I think there is no limit, almost no limit, to what rural America can accomplish if they have access to basic tools and supports, the kinds of tools and supports that we see across the rest of the country. Technical expertise, quality infrastructure, access to capital. And so I want to thank all of our panelists today for talking about how the 2023 Farm Bill provides us another great opportunity to make sure that those supports and that those tools can be available to rural America, consistent with what we see across the rest of the country. So thank you. You've done an excellent job today. Under the rules of the committee, the record of today's hearing will remain open for 10 calendar days to receive additional material and supplementary written responses from the witnesses to any questions that were posed by any member. And unless there's any further business to come before the committee, the subcommittee, and I see none, this hearing is adjourned.